The storm raging outside matched the turmoil in my chest as I stared at the clock, willing my shift to end. My name is Clementine Harper, and after 30 years as an ER nurse, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me at home that night. Lightning illuminated the hospital parking lot as I dashed to my car, rain pelting my scrubs. The drive home was a blur of windshield wipers and white-knuckled steering. As I fumbled with my house keys, a crack of thunder made me jump. That's when I heard it, a faint knock at the door, barely audible over the howling wind. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. It was past midnight, and in this weather? But something compelled me to open it. There, on my rain-soaked porch, stood a boy no older than 10. His clothes were drenched, his eyes wide with fear. In his arms, he cradled a whimpering toddler. "Can we stay here?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not safe for us anymore." I stood frozen, shock warring with my instinct to help. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. The boy swallowed hard. "I'm Milo. This is my sister, Ada. Please, we need help." Another flash of lightning illuminated their faces, and I gasped. Those eyes, I knew those eyes. "Come in," I said, ushering them inside. "Let's get you dry." As I wrapped them in towels, my mind raced. How did these children find me? And why did they look so familiar? Milo's gaze darted around the room, settling on a faded photograph on my mantel. His eyes widened. "Is that our dad?" My heart stopped. The photo showed my brother Calvin and me, taken years ago before he disappeared. And suddenly, I knew why Milo's eyes seemed so familiar. "Milo," I said carefully, "how do you know that man?" He clutched Ada tighter. "He's our father. Mom always said he left us. But..." Milo's voice broke. "We had to leave. Mom and her boyfriend, they..." I knelt beside him, my nurse's instincts kicking in. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" As Milo began to speak, I realized my quiet life was about to be turned upside down. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't let these children down the way I'd failed my brother all those years ago. I led Milo and Ada to the guest room, my mind reeling from the revelation. These were Calvin's children, my family. As I helped them into dry clothes, Milo's eyes never left my face, searching for something. "You look like the lady in the photo with Dad," he said softly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm your Aunt Clementine. Your father was my brother." Milo's eyes widened. "Was," I sighed, settling onto the bed beside them. "It's complicated, sweetie. But right now, I need to know why you came here. What's going on at home?" Milo's face clouded over. He pulled Ada closer, the toddler already half asleep against his chest. "Mom and her boyfriend, they forget us for days," he whispered. My heart clenched. "Forget you? How?" "They lock themselves in their room. There's no food, and Ada cries." Milo's voice broke. I tried to take care of her, but I couldn't anymore. I fought to keep my voice steady. "How long has this been happening?" "Since Dad left. Mom said he abandoned us. But..." Milo hesitated. "I found your address in an old letter. I thought maybe you could help." The storm outside seemed to fade as I processed Milo's words. Calvin hadn't abandoned them. He'd disappeared. And now his children were suffering. "You did the right thing coming here," I assured him, squeezing his shoulder. "You're safe now. Both of you." Milo nodded, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. I tucked them both in, my mind racing. As I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of their peaceful faces and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter, trying to steady myself. The similarities to my own childhood were too stark to ignore. Calvin and I had suffered neglect, too, though we'd never had the courage to seek help. I glanced at the phone, knowing I should call the authorities, but something held me back. I'd failed Calvin once before. I wouldn't fail his children now. First, I needed more information. Who was this boyfriend? And Lorena. I'd only met her once, at Calvin's wedding. What had happened to turn her into the neglectful mother Milo described? As dawn broke, I made a decision. I'd protect Milo and Ada, no matter the cost. and I'd uncover the truth about what really happened to my brother. The storm had passed, but I knew the real tempest was just beginning. As Milo and Ada slept, I found myself drawn to the old photo album I'd hidden away years ago. Flipping through the pages, I paused at a picture of Calvin and me as teenagers. His mischievous grin and my exasperated smile brought a flood of memories. "Oh, Calvin," I whispered, tracing his face. "If I had been there, could I have saved you from yourself?" The weight of guilt and regret pressed down on me. I'd always known Calvin was involved in something dangerous, but I'd been too caught up in my own life to intervene. Now, staring at his children sleeping in my guest room, I felt the full impact of my failure. A soft knock at the door startled me. Milo stood there, rubbing his eyes. "Aunt Clementine?" he asked hesitantly. "I had a bad dream." I patted the couch beside me. "Come here, sweetie. Want to look at some pictures of your dad?" Milo nodded eagerly, curling up next to me. As we flipped through the album, I found myself sharing stories I'd locked away for years. "Your dad was always getting into trouble," I chuckled, pointing to a photo of Calvin with a black eye. "But he had a good heart." Milo's eyes widened. "Mom never talks about him. She just says he left us." I frowned, choosing my words carefully. "Milo, your dad. He disappeared. We don't know what happened to him." "Disappeared?" Milo's voice trembled. "Like kidnapped." I sighed, closing the album. "I don't know, honey. But I do know he loved you and Ada very much." Milo was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is that why you became a nurse? To help people like Dad?" His perceptiveness caught me off guard. "I suppose it was," I admitted. "I couldn't save your dad, but I've tried to save others ever since." As Milo drifted back to sleep, I found myself staring at the phone again. The responsible thing would be to call child services to let the system handle this. But the system had failed Calvin and me. It had failed Milo and Ada. No, I couldn't trust anyone else with their safety. I had to protect them myself, no matter the cost. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally uncover the truth about what happened to Calvin. I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would start investigating Lorena and her boyfriend. I owed it to Calvin, to Milo and Ada, and to the scared teenager I once was, to make things right. This time, I wouldn't fail my family. Morning light filtered through the curtains as I sat at my kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Milo and Ada were still asleep, exhausted from their ordeal. I knew I had to act fast before Lorena realized they were missing. I pulled out a notepad and began jotting down what I knew. Lorena's last known address, the boyfriend's name if Milo remembered it, any details about their lifestyle. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "And Clementine?" Milo's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, looking small and uncertain. "Good morning, sweetie. How did you sleep?" He shrugged, joining me at the table. "What are you doing?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I'm trying to figure out how to help you and Ada." Milo's eyes widened. "Are you going to call the police?" "Not yet," I said, choosing my words carefully. "First, we need to know if you and Ada are in immediate danger. I can't let another family fall apart without doing everything I can to help." Milo nodded, his face serious beyond his years. "Mom's boyfriend. His name is Rick. He's mean when he drinks, which is a lot." I wrote down the name, my jaw clenching. "Does he ever hurt you or Ada?" Milo shook his head. "Not really. He just yells and breaks stuff."
"But Mom."
He trailed off, tears welling in his eyes. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "It's okay, Milo. You're safe here." He wiped his eyes. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to go to your house, see what's going on. But I need you to stay here with Ada, okay? Can you be brave for me?" Milo nodded solemnly. "I can take care of her. I always do." My heart ached at his words. No child should have to bear such responsibility. "I know you do, sweetheart. And you've done an amazing job. But now it's my turn to take care of both of you." As I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far more dangerous than I realized. But the image of Calvin's face, of Milo's determined eyes, steeled my resolve. I grabbed my keys, giving Milo instructions on emergency contacts and how to reach me. As I headed for the door, I turned back one last time. I promise you, Milo, I'm going to make this right. With that, I stepped out into the morning sun, ready to face whatever demons awaited me at Lorena's house. I parked my car a block away from Lorena's house, my heart pounding. The neighborhood was run down, with overgrown lawns and peeling paint. As I approached on foot, I noticed empty bottles littering the front yard of a small, dilapidated bungalow. This had to be it. Creeping around to the side, I peered through a grimy window. The interior was a mess, clothes strewn about, takeout containers piled high. My stomach churned as I imagined Milo and Ada living in this squalor. Suddenly, a crash from inside made me jump. A man's voice, slurred and angry, boomed through the thin walls. "Where are those damn kids, Lorena?"
Did you lose them again?
I crouched lower, straining to hear the response. A woman's voice, barely audible, mumbled something incoherent. Useless, the man, Rick, I assumed, spat, just like their deadbeat father. My fists clenched at the mention of Calvin. I wanted to burst in, to confront them both, but I forced myself to stay put. I needed more information. As I shifted my position, my foot crunched on something. Looking down, I saw a syringe glinting in the grass. My blood ran cold. This was worse than I'd imagined. A door slammed, and I ducked behind a bush as Rick stumbled out onto the porch. He lit a cigarette, his bloodshot eyes scanning the yard. For a moment, I thought he'd spotted me, but he just cursed and went back inside. I'd seen enough. As I made my way back to my car, my mind raced with the implications. Drugs, neglect, possible abuse. Milo and Ada were in far more danger than I'd realized. "It's worse than I thought," I whispered to myself, gripping the steering wheel. Lorena never changed. I drove home in a daze, the weight of what I'd witnessed pressing down on me. I couldn't let the kids go back there. But what could I do? I had no legal right to keep them. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Milo's face in the window, waiting for me. His eyes were full of hope and fear. In that moment, I knew I'd do whatever it took to protect them. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. It was time to confront Lorena and Rick. I couldn't let another day go by with those children in danger. As I walked to my front door, I felt a familiar determination settle over me. The same feeling I'd had years ago when I decided to become a nurse. This time, I wouldn't fail. This time, I'd save my family. I stood on Lorena's doorstep, my heart hammering in my chest. The evidence I'd gathered burned in my pocket. Photos of the squalid conditions, the drug paraphernalia, all meticulously documented. With a deep breath, I knocked firmly. Shuffling sounds came from inside, followed by muffled cursing. The door swung open, revealing a disheveled Lorena. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed suspiciously. "Clementine? What the hell are you doing here?" I pushed past her into the house, my nose wrinkling at the stale odor. "We need to talk, Lorena. About Milo and Ada." Rick appeared from the bedroom, his face twisted in anger. "Who's this? Where are the kids?" I stood my ground, meeting his glare. "The children are safe, which is more than I can say for them here." Lorena's face paled. "You took them? You can't do that." "I can, and I did," I retorted, pulling out the photos. "This is how you're living. This is what you're exposing those innocent children to. It stops now." Rick lunged forward, but I sidestepped him easily. "You got no right," he slurred. "I have every right," I shot back. "I'm their family. I'm here to protect them when you won't." Lorena sank onto the couch, her head in her hands.
You don't understand.
"It's been so hard since Calvin." "Don't you dare use Calvin as an excuse," I snapped. "He would be ashamed of what you've become." Rick made another grab for me, but I was ready. Years of handling unruly patients had honed my reflexes. I dodged him again, causing him to stumble into the wall. "This is your last chance, Lorena," I said, my voice steely. "Make it right, or I'm taking the kids, and you're facing the courts. I have enough evidence here to ensure you never see them again." Lorena's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and fear. You can't take my children. Watch me, I replied coldly. You have 24 hours to clean up your act. Get rid of the drugs. Get rid of him. I jerk my thumb at Rick and start acting like a mother. Or I'll make sure you lose them for good. As I turned to leave, Rick made one last lunge. This time, I was ready. I sidestepped, causing him to crash into the coffee table. As he lay groaning, I fixed Lorena with a final, piercing stare. 24 hours, Lorena. The clock's ticking. With that, I walked out, leaving chaos in my wake. I knew the real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Those kids needed me, and I wouldn't let them down. The 24-hour ultimatum ticked by with agonizing slowness. I spent the time fortifying my home, installing new locks and security cameras. Milo and Ada watched me with wide, worried eyes, but I assured them everything would be okay. As the deadline approached, I braced myself for the storm I knew was coming. It arrived with the screech of tires and the slam of car doors. Clementine. Lorena's shrill voice pierced the air. Give me back my kids. I peered through the window, my heart sinking. Lorena wasn't alone. Rick was with her, along with two burly men I didn't recognize. Milo, take Ada to the safe room, I whispered urgently. Remember what we practiced. Don't come out until I get you. Milo nodded solemnly, scooping up his sister and disappearing down the hall. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Lorena, you're trespassing, I said firmly. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. You can't take them, Lorena screamed, her face contorted with rage. They're my kids. Rick stepped forward, cracking his knuckles menacingly. You heard her, lady. Hand over the brats. I stood my ground, my finger hovering over the panic button on my phone. I gave you a chance to clean up your act. You chose this. Lorena lunged forward, trying to push past me. I blocked her, using the self-defense moves I'd learned years ago. She stumbled back, shock registering on her face. You don't understand, she sobbed. I need them. The social workers, they'll take them away if they find out. You should have thought of that before, I replied coldly. Before you chose drugs over your children's safety. Rick growled, advancing towards me. Enough talk. We're taking those kids. Just as he reached for me, sirens wailed in the distance. Relief flooded through me. My neighbors had called the police, just as we'd agreed. You're too late, I said, a grim smile on my face. It's over, Lorena. As the police cars pulled up, chaos erupted. Rick and his cronies tried to flee, while Lorena collapsed on the lawn, wailing. Officers swarmed the scene, quickly subduing the men. A familiar face approached me. Officer Martinez, a regular at the ER. You okay, Clem? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The kids are safe. That's all that matters. As Lorena was led away in handcuffs, still screaming about her rights, I felt a small hand slip into mine. Milo stood beside me, Ada on his hip. Is it over, Aunt Clem? He asked quietly. I squeezed his hand, tears pricking my eyes. Yes, sweetheart. It's over. You're safe now. The weeks following Lorena's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and adjustments. I took a leave of absence from the hospital, focusing all my energy on Milo and Ada. As we sat in the courtroom, waiting for the judge's decision on custody, I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Milo squeezed my hand, his eyes serious. What if they send us back? He whispered. I pulled him close. That's not going to happen, sweetheart. I promise. The judge cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the evidence presented and the recommendations of Child Protective Services, I hereby grant full custody of Milo and Ada Harper to their great-aunt, Clementine Harper. Relief washed over me as Milo buried his face in my shoulder, sobbing quietly. Ada, oblivious to the proceedings, babbled happily in my lap. As we left the courthouse, I saw Lorena being led away in handcuffs. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of remorse in hers before she looked away. Part of me ached for her, remembering the young woman who had once made my brother so happy. But I knew I had made the right choice. Back home, I watched Milo and Ada play in the backyard, their laughter a balm to my soul. The house, once so quiet and filled with memories of Calvin, now buzzed with new life. That evening, as I tucked them into bed, Milo looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Aunt Clem," he asked hesitantly, "is this really our home now? Forever?" I sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair. "Yes, Milo. You're safe now. This is your forever home." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I wish Dad could see us now." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I think he can. And I know he'd be so proud of you both." As I turned out the light, I heard Milo whisper, "Good night, Aunt Clem. I love you." Tears pricked my eyes as I replied, "I love you too, Milo. Both of you, so much." Later, as I sat on the porch, watching the stars come out, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be challenges, therapy sessions, and undoubtedly some difficult days. But for the first time since Calvin disappeared, I felt hope. These children, who had come to me on a stormy night, had brought light back into my life. We were a family now, bound not just by blood, but by love and shared struggles. As I headed back inside, I paused at the mantel, looking at the old photo of Calvin and me. "We did it, little brother," I whispered. "Your kids are safe. And I promise, I'll give them the life you would have wanted for them." With a smile, I turned off the lights and headed to bed, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, together as a family.